Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Darek Zabrocki and I'm a concept designer working for films, games, and a wide range of entertainment industry projects. Lately, my scope of work also include designing real architectural places. I've been working in this field professionally for almost a decade, collaborating with studios like Fox, Disney, Netflix, Blur, EA, Sony, contributing to many well-known franchises from those companies like Love, Death and Robots, Maze Runner, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Destiny 2, Death Stranding, Assassin's Creed, and many more. Alright, in this video tutorial I would like to cover a very important technique, which is displacement map. And I call this chapter Power of Displacement Maps. Why is it so powerful? For me, it's one of the most efficient way to create detailed or incredibly detailed looking objects, even using simple geometry. You basically use the height map like that, which is being projected on the surface of the object, right? So, for instance, it estimates how it will generate, how it will push the vertices on your object based on this pattern. For instance, the black or dark values will stay even with the local face of the object, and the brighter the value is, the more you can actually push the object up. So it will basically pull off the geometry vertices and creates the illusion of 3D dimensionality. And it's opposite to normal map. It actually pulls off the geometry. So it creates the detail information. It's of course heavier, and but basically for me it saves a lot of time, because you can create like super interesting details and density of information for your models in no time. And with this setup that I use with GPU based on RTX technology, it's really much faster these days to create, very detailed displacement map objects, and very fast, and in no time. So basically, let's have a look into what I got here, because I have like quite a few displacement maps, or basically height maps, that I created for this video tutorial, something like that, which is pretty pretty neat, pretty detailed, something more organic, taken from megascans and roof tiles, some simple greebles, some more detailed paths from the hard surface stuff, and for instance this brick wall. But let's have a look into this stuff that I have here, because I generated quite a few of them. They are not downloaded from internet. I have some like those from real displacement textures, like this one, or stuff from megascans, or I have also from other artists, like industrial details. But I really like generate those detailed panels, or like sci-fi suggestions, and you can easily create it with JS placement software. It's pretty neat software. It has like a pre-made presets for creating the height map, and you can basically play around with everything, like whatever assets you want to use for generating the map, and you can estimate like the scale of it. You can just add objects on and off. You can estimate the iterations number. So of course the lower the lower number of iteration is, the more simple height map will be. And it of course has like quite a few pre-made presets, sort of like categories. I usually use this one, JS Placement 2, and it consists of like classic set of like sort of like hard edge, hard surface objects. And then you can just estimate, adjust the brightness of the background, for instance, and keeping in mind that, of course, that the darker the value will be, the more even, or the less dramatic the pull off of the geometry will be, and the brighter the object is, or the brighter the value is, the more it will go. It will be actually extruded or stretched. I will show you in the practical part, but just let's have a look into, like, you can create like super interesting, super detailed objects, like you can increase the iterations. So now it will generate things, bam, bam, and it's kind of like, keep on going and looping till it hits this given number. So we can create like a super detailed sort of like, pipelines, or like panels, or like, suggestion of like a, sci-fi city. And you will be using this this map to project it on top of the simple geometry, because I have like some simple primitives that I created for this video as well. And I will show you in the practical part how to utilize that, how powerful this tool is, and why is it that powerful. So let's go into the fun part of the practical. All right, let's say that I really like this height map, and I think it has like a really interesting, detailed information. It kind of gets like very detailed in some parts. It has like some negative space, or space to breathe. And I'm just gonna save this map. So it of course saves the objects as PNG file. So as you see, it kind of got generated as PNG file. It's pretty highly detailed. You don't need actually much more from that, because it will already let you create like a really interesting details. So I save this map, and I have the scene with a simple primitives that I created in Octane. So basically you have 3 standard primitives: cylinder, sphere, and box. I'm gonna just drag the sphere a little bit higher so I can see that better. And of course I gave them as simple materials. I'm just gonna turn off the smoothing. Maybe we can add some daylight to just have a little bit better lighting information on the objects. And now let's see what we can do with the ready height maps that I showed you before. So for instance, I'm gonna start with like a ground. So basically I'm just gonna assign this ground texture to my plane, and I need to add displacement texture node and project it onto the plane. So look what happens if I go to texture displacement map settings. There's like nothing even created yet. I'm just gonna beat up the level of detail, so it will have like 4K detail. Actually, the texture itself is 8K, but I think 4K is enough for the preview purposes. I'm starting to dragging the power of the height map, which actually is responsible. I'm just gonna turn off the primitives for now, just to see what's going on. I'm just actually dragging the slider, off and on to basically pull the vertices that I was talking about in previously. So it actually pulls off the brightest part, and the dark part will actually stay close to the face of the geometry. It's of course very tileable right now. You can really see it's like very small. So I of course have to adjust the UV transform, and you can see and that it starts to really emerge. I think it's I have a little bit too much specular, or actually I can just add some more roughness so I don't see those like speculars on the object, because it's actually gonna be better to have them off for now, and we can focus clearly on the texture. So as you see, by UV transform, you can estimate how big this ground will be and how much zoom you will get into the texture. I think this one looks pretty good already. It's very detailed. You can even push it farther, but as you see, if you push too much power on the height map, it starts to drag and pull off geometry very and naturally, right? So it kind of looks off already. It's like just too much. So I think the power around like 1.5, maybe 2 is definitely enough, because from the side you can see it really nicely drag, the vertices based on the projected map. So the lower you get with the number, the less the effect will be visible, right? So ultimately you are gone with the details. So I think like 1.5 is definitely enough, and it reads very well. And let's see what we can do if I want to bring back my simple forms, my simple primitives, and maybe I can, for instance, generate totally different details on all of them separately. So let's focus first on the sphere. I think it's slightly too big, so I just want to reduce it by half. 0.5 will do the job. And of course, I can drag it down so it's closer to the ground. And let's see what happens if for instance, I'm just gonna assign the gribble texture. Of course, I'm gonna use grayscale. You don't need to import it as a color layer, because of course it reads only the properties based on black and white range of the values. So I again need to add the texture, displacement texture node, assign it to my material, and of course I need to assign the texture itself. So let's do a similar job. I'm just gonna increase the density of the detail. Might be a little bit too much for now, 4K. I don't know. You can really see it starts to slowing down the performance, but it's still manageable at this point. So basically, I assign some material, some texture to this sphere, and I'm actually gonna change the material slightly, just make it a little bit more grayish, so it better reads the whole form. Just turn off for now the other primitives, and it got like some really cool gribble texture, because I use this one, right? I use this gribble displacement height map, and it creates like really cool details. But I think I can play around with it a little bit more, maybe reducing the scale of it. So of course I use UV transform, and I can make it like really detailed, so bam, it gets like really, it looks like sort of like a Death Star. You can just of course use different height maps, and you can even merge them, but I will show you that later. Like, let's focus on the basics first. So the second primitive I will use will be box. So I'm gonna focus on that. I'm just gonna basically copy my material from the sphere. Oops, and wait, I'm gonna assign it back on the box, so they got the same, value range. And now I can copy the texture, displacement texture node, and for instance, what we can assign, let's assign, maybe let's assign some of the hard surface stuff. Maybe this one. It's not yet that detailed. I think it's like a much lower iteration pass in JS placement than, for instance, this one. So I think this would do the job. Let's just, oh, sorry, I actually should import it as grayscale. It shouldn't really matter that much, because even if I use the color option for this texture, it won't read any colors, because it of course is black and white, or it's just basically value range of grays and darks and brighter value of black and white. So I'm gonna do the same, just assigning the texture. It reads something, and of course the texture right now should be just slightly more simplified. You can of course estimate the medium level, so it actually just creates like how much, how to say that, I think it just creates like how much your texture, your displacement will sort of it's like pulling off the vertices from all sides, and basically it creates the object will have a little bit more range around the vertices, right? So it's sort of like I'm just keeping, like adjusting this sometimes, because like on the very detailed displacement maps, you can get like some pretty crazy results. Sometimes the faces are being detached. So of course you can also project the displacement based on like pre-made presets. I think that in this one, box is pretty good, because of course we are using the box primitive. And let's play around with the UV transform. So for instance, you can create, I'm just making it bigger instead of just having like a very dense one. You can just create bigger, and we have some sort of like a nice hard surface sci-fi box, right? Whatever, with some really cool panels going on. And of course I can increase the power of the displacement, but keeping in mind that will also pull off the geometry around the edges. I cannot go too much, because it starts to really deform my object, right? So I'm gonna use it very subtly, and it already creates like some really interesting results. I would say, bam, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, like sci-fi hard surface box, and I didn't even need to model any of those, right? I just used my simple primitive and projected the displacement map on top. That's why I really feel and I really think that this is such a powerful tool. Let's look into the third one, which is our cylinder. With this one, it will be interesting, because I want to use the texture that has a brick wall. So I'm just gonna import this. And of course I need to adjust the UV transfer. I can tell that the texture and the displacement actually is way too dense, but first I'm gonna copy the material properties. I forgot to replace it here. And now project the displacement texture and play around with the UV transform, and bam. And even you can just increase the power of that, then you get like really incredible detail, really sophisticated form. And it could be like a like a castle tower or whatever. And imagine you got blocked out all of your objects, all of the, like the whole block out of the castle, for instance. and you don't really want to spend hours on like projecting, you know, details in ZBrush or 3D code by making like, you know, those bricks and, you know, projecting the height maps with like, you know, modeling it all, or, you know, pushing the geometry. You can just slap displacement height map on top of like super primitive, very simple primitives, and then get like some really amazing results, right? This is the power of that, you know, this is the power of the displacement maps. And the next one, I would like to show you how to quickly block out the scene with those displacement maps. So let's have a look what's next. Okay, I got those. I'm gonna leave those primitives. I'm just gonna turn off the properties for the textures, and I'm gonna play around with some of those height maps I created before in JS placement software. So I'm gonna use some of my favorite ones. I think this one is pretty cool. It's like a nice balance between the negative space, some detailed parts. I think this one does a good job as well. So I'm gonna drag them to Octane. I'm gonna use exact the same primitives, maybe even adding like some other simple forms that I created, and to block out the scene very quickly to show you one more time the power of displacement and how I actually use that, how fast you can use that, utilizing that workflow with, for instance, those RTX cards, and how they speed up the process. Because displacement maps, as I said before, opposite to normal or bump map, it doesn't only create the impression of the details, it actually drags the geometry, which actually has to be calculated by your PC much heavier, and it will actually affect the performance much more than just a regular, you know, flat surface texture that gives you the suggestion of the detail, you know. So you just create the new geometry out of like a simple one, but it actually has to practically pull off the vertices to create the right effect, right? So I'm gonna actually, maybe I shouldn't just resign from that. I'm gonna actually bring back those. I'm gonna save it, save the tree, create a new one. So now I can just delete those details, and for instance, I can create some nice texture. Which one was that? Actually, I need to look. No, actually, I just want to drag it down one by one. I think I want to use this one for the plane. I want to create like some nice, you know, let's say some detailed station, or like, you know, some cool hard surface sci-fi structures. So I'm gonna adjust the UV map. And for instance, you can of course unlock your UV transformation, which actually lets you, you know, go along a different axis, X or Y. So basically you can create very unique, you know, sort of like, you know, texture or, you know, suggestion of detail. This actually looks like, you know, number of GPU cards placed on the motherboard, like a huge, you know, setup of that. Or you can basically, you know, stretch upon the base displacement onto the y-axis, and it actually gives you nice sort of like sideways, you know, details. And now I can lock it again, and it will, of course, it will save the ratio. Maybe I can even like adjust the lighting a little bit to just have some nice dramatic lighting to help me, read the forms a little bit better. Look, it just gets like super incredible detail. And let's put some, let's put some sexy texture on top of that sphere. I'm gonna use this one. And of course, it's plenty of things like just, trying things out and, pushing it to the limits. So of course, you have to take into consideration sometimes it just takes a little bit more time with calculating all the power, all the detail information, because it really affects the, the performance, but it's worth it. You can create like some really, really, really cool sceneries out of that. So I'm gonna use also some blocks that I created beforehand. I think this one would be cool. Let's see. So it might be some like sci-fi building, and I'm just gonna assign a texture on that. UV transform and increase the power of that. It actually starts to look like really, really detailed, really interesting, I think I have the plane a little darker, so I'm just gonna utilize it all. So they look the same. And the beauty part of that is actually you can, for instance, take this bit of the building, and for instance, I can just make it bigger. And then, for instance, you can duplicate the object. You can, of course, change the scale of some parts. You have to take into consideration, of course, it will totally change your geometry. How do you read the displacement map? So what I would do, I would actually even just copy that all, and then play around like UV again from scratch to just achieve some really, interesting detail, right? Detail pass. And maybe let's just use another block. Oh, that's pretty big. So I'm gonna log the values of the transformation. And I'm just playing around just to show you, how creatively you can change things on the go all the time. So for instance, maybe I will use a different texture for this building. Let's say I'm gonna use some industrial parts. And of course I need to adjust the details with UV transformation. So it kind of gives you like a really neat results. It looks it starts to look really interesting, and just play around. Okay, just pick up the angle and just find it really interesting form. But what also is really important to mention with this one, I'm just gonna add the regular plane beneath my objects. So I can feel it can actually sit on the surface. So maybe I can just even copy the colors of those materials here and adjust the plane. Bam. And just move it somewhere. So the beauty of that is actually you can merge the displacement textures, right? So I'm gonna show you how to do that, but it already gives me some really cool vibes to play around with different forms, and I can just increase the number of detail here, for instance, by making one more set of this the first block, and just combine it with the form here. I can just even drag some parts off and just move it around. And of course, for better results, I should just duplicate the object. So I can play around with the UV transformation separately on this object only, right? But it gives like some really interesting vibe. All in all, and for instance, I feel like I just want to have a little bit more interesting situation going on this wall. So for instance, I can combine different materials or two different materials on that. I'm gonna do that in a second. I think I'm gonna just change all the stuff to glossy material so it will reflect the lighting a little bit more, and for instance increase the roughness so it will scatter the lighting across the surface a little bit more because of the rough material. Like this one, and just replace all those. It's fine, you can just keep the displacement information, but just assign more metallic material. So let's say that I wanna just use again this sphere. It's gonna bring some really cool, sort of like a Destiny vibe to the scene. Sort of like that. And of course I need to replace the material here again. You can just build a whole set out of that, just playing around with the forms, designing your composition, It's basically all on you. I don't like this wall. I'm just gonna get rid of that right now. And push it slightly closer to the main wall. I don't know, I just gonna, you know, play around with that. So just show you the simple setup. But let's say that I wanna add some more definition to this sphere. So what I can do basically, I can merge two different materials. I'm actually gonna drag this tree a little bit more. I'm gonna add more a node seeds to my main group of the objects. And what I can do is actually I can create a material map, and it has to be mapped with my object. So by that I can duplicate a material, and I will use, of course, different texture on this one. It has to have exact the same position and exact the same placement information. So it actually creates like two different objects with two different materials and combine them together. So let me show you quickly how it works. I'm gonna use, for instance, this one. It's pretty cool. And now playing around with like a different UV transformation. So you see, if I turn it off, right? I'm just gonna turn it off from the placement. I just don't see anything besides those main details. And let's say that I will change the mid-level into 1. It actually is gonna you know, showcase only the previous material. So it's sort of like a mixed material, but not really. So if you just sort of like balance out the mid-level, you can create like some really interesting details pass. And I'm actually gonna add some interesting details here. And maybe the second material will have a little bit more detail information, or actually I can use for this one, I can use, for instance, structural texture maybe, just to see. Yeah, you can clearly see. I can even change the color so you can see it better, right? So you can see it's like two different sort of like materials, but it's actually two different forms that are overlapping each other, you know. So I can, for instance, change this one into something more crazier, like this one. And now you can see the pure power of, like, you know, merging those two textures together. So it really gives you nice detailed vibe. And yeah, you can just you know, if I use it around, if I move the placement for this material, of course it will detach. So the other thing I would solve is basically making a group of those two materials, those two placements. So I'm just gonna cut it off. I'm just gonna add new group and add those two placements. And add one more placement just for a group, and then put it into the render tag. So I need to reset the position. So now if you change the position of the whole group, it will affect both materials, right? So I'm just kind of group them together so they are not detached anymore, right? So it's pretty cool, pretty easy to use, you know, just it's kind of I think pretty logical, but sometimes you have to find your way around, you know, those things, right? Or those like sort of not restrictions, but of course it kind of screw my gizmo right now, so I need to play around like between the sliders and the gizmo mode. So it's something that you can play around with and then achieve this desirable effect, right? So let's see how we can even improve this composition. So I decided to quickly create a composition based on sort of like a generic, you know, sci-fi military shapes. So I imagine this scene could be sort of like a, you know, like a futuristic city with some landing pads for maybe military service. And of course, as you see, it's all pretty much just super simple shapes, right? This one kind of resembles, you know, like the tower of like career shape, or, you know, military base that we could, you know, observe in, you know, in many projects in last couple of years, like Halo or Destiny, or even, you know, looking back further, like Aliens or whatever. So basically it's more like, you know, playing up with simple forms, simple shapes, something that we can associate ourselves with. So sort of generic, but and added some, you know, like random, you know, building shapes just to keep, you know, things a little bit more diagonal if you look at it from the, you know, low camera angle, and also to give, you know, a little bit more interesting you know, element to the composition. But of course it lacks of a lot of details. So here it comes, you know, the beauty of displacements, right? So I'm gonna grab some of the displacement heights maps that I showed before. So maybe this one would be cool for I think I even like some tests before, but yeah, let's try it out. So this one would be cool to sort of like suggest, you know, what's going on in the city. Just having like some, you know, nice and sci-fi you know, streets, or, you know, like some buildings, just, you know, some, you know, suggestions of details going on, and, you know, stuff like that, which kind of looks pretty cool. But it's not enough for me. I really want to have even some more, you know, sticking out objects to really break up composition and the shapes. So I'm gonna basically wait. I'm gonna basically create one more pass for the height map, and this one will actually be something different. Maybe this one. Let's see. You know, I just add some more sort of like density, but I really want this one to be a little bit more towards the top, so we can see those buildings really striking and like reaching the sky. So of course I need to play around with the UV transformation again. So sort of bringing like more density, more detail, more sort of noise of detail. And now I see like this already like taking over, the scale of my main forms, so I can reduce it quite a lot and reduce also the previous background height map. So basically I just need to reduce the scale of it so it's not as prominent, right? It's not taking over the focus on the scene. Yeah, now it would look better. So I need to also match the color for my materials. I think this one actually should be replaced. Yep, so it's more unified. And also maybe I can add some to those guys as well, just bringing all the materials so they have the same sort of like a value. So it's more consistent, right? Of course, I want to keep those like sort of like spherical radars white for now, because they actually don't really need to have like specific materials for now. If you look at the military stuff, you can see that those like radars have some sort of like rough material definition. But of course, I really need to bring some more detail to my buildings, right? So it looks pretty cool when I look at the city already, but I kind of miss some nice fleshed out detail on the main forms. I can even like increase the scale of those buildings. It's kind of bring like huge mass and sort of like bring this sort of epicness to the forms, right? So now I need to take those buildings and add also some displacement texture. So I'm gonna create a node for that. I'm gonna assign it, and it will be assigned to both of the buildings. And I'm gonna pick up some of those. It's on my second screen, so as you see, like it's the lays that you saw in the previous part of this video. Just gonna turn off on my browser. So you can clearly see that it's most of the stuff that I created basically with JS placement. So I might just use I think one of those. It's pretty cool for paneling. It's gonna give like a nice vibe. Maybe let's try this one first. So I'm gonna put it back again on my second screen, and I'm just gonna try this one out. And I'm just gonna build some height. I can of course set up the camera that I like. So for instance, this one is actually pretty cool. I can increase the zoom, some sort of like have like a nice vibe that we can just fly over into this composition, and I can just copy this render target, which is my camera in this case. And of course I can work on I can just work on different cameras. So this is gonna stay as a sort of like my safe camera, and this one I can just work around. So getting back to my building, I can basically create some sort of a nice indication of detail here. So I need to bring a little bit more quality to the resolution of the displacement. Well, now you can hear my GPUs are getting really, really loud because of the performance that is required to calculate all those crazy displacements. So even though it's like super fast technique, you have to consider, you have to really remember about how heavy it is for the computer, for the graphic card in this particular case. So because of course it's GPU based. So let's just try. Yeah, I kind of like it. It starts looks pretty cool. It kind of gives me like a nice vibe, nice flow of the details here. It's not too much. It's sort of like at the right place at the right time, so. And when you set up the nice lighting, it already looks pretty neat, pretty detailed. So especially if you just increase the height of the map, so it really starts to flesh out the details. And I don't even really need to merge it with other displacement. I don't really want to just overuse the performance right now. It's enough as it is, so it's almost perfect to start painting over. But let's maybe just add some more detail to one of those buildings, maybe that are closer to the camera. So those guys, I can basically just copy that displacement and basically, oh no, this one. Yeah, attach it to those buildings. So I'm just replicating the same, settings for other buildings, and maybe for even this one, and maybe even for this one, and maybe even for those ones. And bam, it's creates like really sort of like high poly vibe. So if you look at the camera, look, it's pretty intense, like I kind of feel like it's pretty detailed already. So if you look from far, yes, it looks pretty cool. Let's maybe try to play around with the lighting it. Just like it's sort of like my addiction that I like. Even putting some sort of like final illustration pass, even while designing in 3D, is pretty cool. I don't know, I just like doing that. So just change the lighting. I can just do whatever. I'm just searching for like some cool long shadows here. Yeah, it's pretty good mood. So yeah. So you can just rotate the sun and position of that, and really find the right vibe, the right mood, the right situation of light that sort of makes it super inspiring to paint over. I think I'm gonna paint over it anyway later, just for fun. It's kind of cool. Yeah, I sort of like it. It's really like, oh holy shit! It's really detailed. Maybe I can do one more thing. I can actually maybe bring one of those forms. Maybe those guys. Wait, I'm gonna bring this one. I'm gonna bring this guy. I can just maybe I'm just moving it around Oh yeah, I just didn't move also those radars, but it's not really mandatory at this point. I just want to check out one thing, so I'm just gonna add a little bit more chaos to that scene. I will show you why. Let's get back to my render. Oh, this one? No. This one? No. Maybe this one. So what I want to, it's where is that? I just really want to. I wanted to play with like some additional object to cast, you know, some shadow on nearby objects. But, I'm not sure. Let's see. Sort of, but I don't know. Yeah, something more like that. That I have like a, you know, object on different levels, and like all different platforms are casting shadows on the ground. So I have like a very, you know, a very visible, you know, like foreground elements, and you know, you can just even play around with like aperture later. So, you know, you can really flesh out like what's really my focus on the scene. For now, it's maybe not really important. Yeah, something like that. The background pore, the foreground pores are really getting into shadows. Oh yeah, exactly this. So I want to have like the sun behind, you know, behind the camera on the right side, and this building that kind of blocks my foreground casts also some shadow on the nearby objects, right? So this would be pretty interesting, I guess. This actually looks pretty interesting from all angles. So yeah, man, I think I'm gonna just paint over on that. It's like I see a lot of potential for those structures. It's pretty inspiring. I can open the composition a little bit. So it's a lot about the staging later on. Of course, since I showed you guys that the power of displacement, now I can purely focus on the fun part, which is basically, you know, playing around with like different settings, different options, different compositions, and what's not. So yeah, for this part, I think it's about that. I hope you find it helpful, and see you in the next video. Bye bye. Thank you.